Hey, everybody. Welcome in. Very happy Super Bowl week to everybody. Hope you're having a great week. This is the Mailbag edition of the Utopia Football Podcast for Super Bowl week. Most of the chatter, I believe, in the mailbag will probably be more Texans related to the hiring of Nick Caley and what some of the things the team is going to do coming up will be. That was a really awkwardly phrased sentence by me just there. I apologize. There was a big media party last night. There was a lot of alcohol. I don't know what to tell you, but whatever synapse in my brain is required or who's tasked with putting sentences together, it may have been negatively impacted by all the sugary, fruity drinks that I was drinking last night at the media party. Kudos to the city of New Orleans for doing an amazing job, as they always do, for hosting us here. I'm coming to you live from our Airbnb, about a mile and change outside of the French Quarter, walking distance for sure. We got a nice bike path that walks directly down to the French Quarter. I know that firsthand because I did that yesterday, and I will do it again today. We're recording here on a Wednesday, late morning. Just got done with Radio Row. Came back to the Airbnb to chat with you guys. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610. And if you found this podcast, you probably already know who I am. But if you have found this podcast and you've not clicked the subscribe button yet, well, what are you waiting for? Click whatever button it is on whatever mechanism or app you're using to listen to this to make sure that you get this podcast automatically. And you don't have to worry about going and finding it each and every week. Probably will be another episode later this week. It's a question mark. It's up in the air. I did an emergency episode about the hiring of Nick Caley, and unfortunately, there was no sound on it. It was about a 12-minute episode where I was just spewing hot takes, I tells you, about Nick Caley. I think most of how I feel about the hire is going to be revealed in answering the questions that you guys have about the hire. My general feeling on it before we get into the mailbag, and a quick reminder there, houmailbag@gmail.com if you want to send in an email about anything Texans related, anything NFL related. We're going to be doing another one next week after the Super Bowl is over. So there may be Super Bowl emails that you may have, depending on how compelling the game is. But my general feeling on the Nick Caley hire is I'm fine with it. I'm not over the moon about it. I think it's a hire that makes sense. He's got a background that makes sense. His ties to the network that is the Texans Brain Trust makes sense. He's a John Carroll University grad, just like Nick Caserio. Spent 6 years in New England from 2015 to 2020, just like Nick Caserio. And Nick spent many more years than that there, but they overlapped in New England with each other. He spent the last couple of years sitting underneath the Sean McVay learning tree, which to me is sort of a version of the, it's part of the same floral family as the Kyle Shanahan tree, same plant family, same thought process behind offense, a lot of the same methodologies, a lot of the same credos when it comes to coaching. So, and obviously that's where D'Amico is steeped in. So it's a hire that made sense to me. They in the process here since the hire, as of Wednesday morning, it looks like Cole Popovich is going to be the offensive line coach. I don't have a strong feeling on that one way or the other than to tell those of you who feel like you don't want anybody who had anything to do with last year's offensive line even remotely close to the building. I would say, I get it. I understand that. But I'm total wait and see on Cole Popovich as well. Like, I'm not somebody who's, I don't know much about him other than he was the Texans assistant O-line coach last year. And like Caley and Caserio, he was in the building in New England. I think he was there from 2016 through 2020. So, and then Gerard Johnson's going to stick around as quarterback's coach. And I think from what I know about that, what we all know about how CJ feels about Gerard and obviously other things, I feel like of all these guys on the staff, Gerard is the guy that we know the best because he's been around the longest, going all the way back to high school and then A&M and throughout his entire coaching saga. I'm totally cool with Gerard being around. I do wonder what the dynamic is when you're working for a guy whose job you interviewed for. But I think it's a smart move by Gerard to stick around. Look, if Nick Caley is the right hire, then at a minimum, Gerard is going to get a real good look at the OC job if people come calling for him to be a head coach. Probably getting way ahead of myself thinking that. Let's get this offense to where it can competently run for 4 yards a carry before I start making Nick Caley the prime target in next year's coaching searches. but I'm just getting underneath the thought process of Gerard sticking around. I don't know what other opportunities Gerard had or has out there. But I'm lukewarm on the position coach thing. I'm a little higher than lukewarm on Nick Caley. So I think he checks a lot of boxes, and everything I've watched on videos, interviews about him, he's very well thought of around the league. Turned down the New England job a year ago when they offered him $3 million to come there and coordinate the offense to come back to New England. Turned down the Jets job this year. So he's obviously a guy who's not desperate, waiting to jump at the first sign of getting an OC job. He's somebody who views himself as a candidate who can be choosy. And I think it says a lot about what the Texans have put together in a relatively short period of time. I mean, really just 2 years. I know there's some other moves that were made to kind of build, Nico Collins was drafted 4 years ago and Derek Stingley Jr., et cetera. But really the crux of this turnaround happened when DeMeco Ryans, CJ Stroud, Will Anderson entered the building and could complement what I think, up to that point, I think Nick Caserio had done a good job of setting the table for the ascension of this rebuild. So Nick Caley sees that. I think his taking this job is a real statement about where the Texans are and where they're going directionally as a franchise. So I'm cool with it. I'm totally cool with it. Other than that, not a ton of Texans news, just coaching news going on. Things are good here in New Orleans. Got a lot of you asking about that. How have things been? How you surviving? Good. Been up late the last couple nights, but it's been fun. We've got awesome group of dudes, man. I mean, most of you listen to this know who all the guys are. Everybody gets along real well. It's fun. We've got 10 guys here. All three shows have both hosts here. Payne and Pendergast, In the Loop, The Drive, and then we've got Figgy Fig here doing all the social media stuff, along with Brandon Scott, who's doing a lot of social media stuff as well. Our boss, Parker Hillis, and then Aaron Raybald, who's our engineer. And we were talking last night as we were smoking cigars out in our backyard here at the Airbnb. This Airbnb is gigantic. It's got 8 suites attached to this common area that I'm in right now. But it's a good group, man. I feel like we could plunk any 4 or 5 guys out of this group and just throw us in a room together, and we'd be cutting up and laughing. So that's what you want. It's really fun. City did a good job with the media party. I don't know if you guys give a shit about that. The buzz is starting to escalate a little bit each day. There's more and more fans in the French Quarter. I had happen to run into John Gruden sitting at a bar yesterday. I went to just walking around the French Quarter. I'm like, you know what? I'm hungry. And this place right here says that their specialty is alligator po' boys. The place is called Pier 424. Door was open, nice restaurant with a really nice bar area next to it, kind of, open air sort of thing. And there was nobody in there. It was like 1:30 in the afternoon. So I went to the bar where there were just 3 other people there. There were 2 people all the way down to the left, and then a civilian also all the way to the right. So I sat in the middle. There was 8 seats in between, 8 or 10 seats in between me and the next closest person either way. So the 2 people to my left looked like they were getting kind of samplings of things coming out. And I noticed one of the guys had a camera, like a really nice video camera. So I figured it was just, like a host and a co-host that were doing content in between their shows. And at one point, the people in the back brought out a gigantic tray with like 36 raw oysters on it to give to put in front of the people there. I'm like, well, wow, I wonder who those people are. But I do want to get a picture of those raw oysters. So I did that. In fact, I stepped up behind one of the people it was for, and I kind of put my hand on his shoulder so I could lean above him and get a good angle on my oyster picture. And I'll show you guys it. If I were better technically, I would just insert the picture in here, but I'll just see there's the picture with the oysters. So I'm leaning over a person's shoulder to take that. And the person whose shoulder I was leaning over happened to be John Gruden, former coach of the Raiders and the Bucks, and now Barstool personality. So I'm like, wow, Coach Gruden. And I told him how much I liked his content on Barstool. Told him that I host the morning show on Sports Radio 610. Name drop Seth Payne. Always a good thing to do when you run into NFL people. Everybody knows Seth. And then I told him how much we enjoy playing his audio of his content on our show. If he says something funny or something we agree with or disagree with, his delivery is just so compelling and good. It makes for great audio. So he said to me, well, how about we do it instead of you playing recording? I'll just come on sometime. And I said, well, that would be great. And then he says, well, pull out your phone. Here's my cell number. And he gave me his cell number. So that was and I had a great alligator po' boy too. It was delicious. So that was a very productive. I walked 1.6 miles to the French Quarter, walked around a little bit, had lunch, ate an alligator po' boy that was amazing, met John Gruden, got his cell phone number, and then walked 1.6 miles back. So between all the meandering around the French Quarter and the 2 long walks there and to and fro, there and back, I walked like 4 miles, ate a alligator po' boy, and met John Gruden. That's a pretty fucking good day right there. It's a pretty good day. So, yay me. All right, let's get to the mailbag, shall we? You're like, enough yammering, Sean. Let's get to the important stuff. Shit we sent you. Okay, so let's start it off. We started off with Ryan from the Shug. Way too early hot take. The Texans will win 14 games next year. My thought process is this team will look a lot like the Vikings from this past season, I'm assuming. Tough defense with efficient offense, at least improved from last year. What do you think? I think the team will be more focused, win a few more close games to improve on last year's record. Needless to say, I'm excited. Good. You should be excited. Everybody should be excited about this. Come on. You got a young quarterback. You got a new OC. You got a good young head coach. And things are moving in the right direction. And unless you really fuck it up, you're going to win this division for the next several years. Maybe one clunker in there somewhere, but you should be the favorite. If you had to pick, like over the next 5 years, how many divisions you think the Texans win, I'd be disappointed if it's less than 4. You know what I mean? So you should be excited. Now, the Vikings, you think they win 14 games next year? That's interesting. I do think the schedule is going to be easier than this past year's schedule, both from quality of opponent standpoint as well as logistically. They're not going to play in the Hall of Fame game again. They're not going to play, I would imagine they're not going to play 3 primetime games in a row in the middle of the season when they've hardly played any primetime games over the last 3 years. I would think they're not going to play 3 games at Christmas time again. I would think. I don't know. Maybe they will. But I don't know. They're not. My guess is the Texans are not as interesting to the league at large now as they were this time a year ago. I think, and I measure that from Buzz on Radio Row. You know, we had a lot of people coming up to us last year talking about, wow, that was an amazing season. What a turnaround, blah, blah. Nobody's coming up to us this year talking about how amazing the season was for the Texans because it was good, but it wasn't what people were expecting. So, and we've seen neither hide nor hair of CJ Stroud on Radio Row yet, for those of you wondering. So 14 games, I would take obviously, Ryan, I would take the under on that, but I like your thought process, and I like the kind of the mirror image that you're presenting with the Vikings right there. A lot's on Nick Caley on this thing, man. The one thing the Vikings have that the Texans don't have is they've got an offensive-minded head coach who is one of the brightest minds in the league. And they got Brian Flores running the defense. You know, they're if you're taking the coordinators as the people who call the offense and defense, so in the case of the Vikings, it's Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores, and you're putting that up against DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caley, advantage Vikings. So do they win 14 games? No. Do I think they win double-digit games again and win the division? Absolutely. You know, my early read on that, and this is before free agency and the draft, would be I would go 11-6 on the Texans, which is what I went last year, and they missed by 1 game. If they just won one of those games that they lost like 3 or 4 games that they should have had based on the stats, like a 94% chance of winning. Win one of those games, and I'm fucking right. Ryan from the Shook says, another question for you. Who do you think they keep from the current staff? This doesn't seem like the type of hire where you expect Nick Caley to fill out your entire offensive staff. I anticipate they keep Gerard Johnson and Bill Lazor if possible, so the additional hires would be O-line. Obviously, Ryan is sending this email before yesterday's news. I think the big questions are, I got to imagine whoever the tight ends coach is gone. Nick Caley, I'm not saying Nick Caley's going to coach tight ends, but I can't imagine Nick Caley comes in as a former tight ends coach, looks at these tight ends and says, these guys are well coached. Ben McDaniels is the wide receivers coach. I could see him sticking around for sure. Danny Barrett's been the running backs coach through multiple regimes. They love keeping him around here. I see no reason why he would be let go, only because he keeps sticking around. So the O-line coach, the O-line hire is the big one. How good Cole Popovich is at his job and how Nick Caley is at his job will be the difference between winning the division and possibly me doing podcasts talking about the Texans from the Super Bowl while they're playing in this, while they're prepping for the Super Bowl. All right, next one. BK, hope this email finds you well. Not sure how I would survive in New Orleans having to be up so early in the morning. So here's wishing you, the drunken Cornell nose tackle, and your crew well. Since your last show, I sent you a list of things, and it turns out many of them were wrong, but maybe we're better for it. Here's my list of wrong things that may be right. Oh, yeah, BK sent me a bunch of things that were now going to be our distractions because the Texans season was over. So the first one was U of H basketball. U of H immediately lost, snapping a 33-game home winning streak, and it was to Tech. But maybe it was okay. They actually moved up. That's true. They moved up in the AP rankings. Well, okay then. So you kind of jinxed Kelvin Sampson and the crew, BK. Number 2, the Rockets haven't won since your last Utopia podcast. Boy, is that true? They haven't, have they? Maybe they needed to remember winning isn't easy. Kind of weird, but hope they straighten this deal out quickly. That is funny. It's an interesting observation on the Rockets. Did they get to a point that they got those big wins and now this 4-game losing streak is symptomatic of something like CJ Stroud? Like this looked a little too easy. These are good topics. I'm going to excuse me for a second while has it been too easy for Rockets during last win streak? All right, so there you go. There was something else we were just talking about. I was going to bring. Oh, number of division titles in the next 5 years. Next 5 years. Okay. Sorry, I have to type down my brainstorming stuff, but I don't have a big production staff. I'm the production staff. Number 3, Chip Kelly went to Vegas. That's true. Yeah, the BK wanted Chip Kelly. Who could have seen this coming? Nick Caley seems like he should know what he's doing. Keep CJ upright, but get the O-line right and make the run game not suck. Yeah, Caley, not Kelly, might be a good thing. The NFL commercial with the little know-it-all kid. He says Miami was what it takes to make a deep playoff run. Well, that ended at NRG. Again, they were wrong, but it's all right. I don't remember what that is, BK. He's bringing up the fact that the CBS Sports Minute is only 20 seconds long. That's because the other 40 seconds are advertising. It used to actually be 60 seconds plus advertising. But in this radio environment that we're in right now, when you try to maximize your minutes, they should put air quotes around it. You know what I mean? The CBS Sports Minute. I'm with you. It usually isn't a good take. It's hard to pigeonhole a good take into 20 seconds, BK. Don't be critical of Jim Rome and Andrew Perloff and Zach Gelb and everybody else that does those sports minutes. It's hard to pigeonhole it in there in 20 seconds. Finally, BK says the NFL quoted the wrong person when deciding to find Joe Mixon. Then the NFL inserted a random other quote and decided, yep, $25K anyways. Obviously, the NFL is wrong. That's what you expect because John Runyon is a punk-ass bitch who is still suspended 3 games and his appeal is denied. You will always deny John Runyon his appeal, BK. That will always be the end of every email you ever send. Thank you very much. All right, Brian in Iowa. Do you see Dalton Schultz's production increasing with new OC Nick Caley and O-line adjustments, or should we move on to accelerate Stover's playing time to ramp up his learning curve? Either way, I'd like to explore the draft at tight end. Where do you rank this need? I think tight end it's okay as far as ranking needs. If we're just going position groups, it's behind O-line for sure. It's behind wide receiver for me. It's behind cornerback, like depth cornerback. Like there's real depth issues at cornerback. I think to your point, Brian, that you were making initially about Dalton Schultz's production increasing with new OC Nick Caley, I think it's worth pointing out, and this is where I knew we'd end up talking about good things and bad things about the hire throughout the mailbag. Nick Caley's a former tight ends coach. I expect, and a good one, like he's had good tight ends playing for him. He's turned Tyler Higbee into a really good tight end for the Rams. I don't think it's unfair to expect improved production out of the tight end group. There needs to be for Dalton Schultz. He's just too goddamn expensive right now to be playing the way that he did last year. I don't think it's an either or when it comes to Schultz, or are we increasing Stover's playing time? I think if they're worth having on the field, both of them, I think Caley will find some personnel groupings that have 2 tight ends, like a 12 personnel type of stuff. They're both athletic enough in the passing game to be dangerous. Caley is post the monster tight end New England Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski stuff. He didn't get there till 2015. But as far as exploring a tight end in the draft, I think the Texans will too. I think if they get to a point in the draft where they're doing just best available, which might be the whole draft. Like if Tyler Warren were there at 25 and the Texans took him, fuck yeah. You know what I mean? And there's other good tight ends, the Arroyo kid out of Miami. There's other good tight ends out there. If they draft a tight end at an appropriate spot to draft the guy, I'm all for it. And Brevin Jordan's coming back next year. So I don't think it's so I don't think it's a huge need because I think they're going to be better just with better coaching. So I put it behind receiver, O-line, corner for sure. Interior D-line I think is in need. I would draft a running back this year as well. I think it's probably 5th or 6th down the list at least. All right. Thanks, Brian. Chris in the ATL. Excited to see Caley as the guy. Here's a conspiracy theory for you. Oh, good. Did Joe Mixon allude to this plan? Bum, bum, bum. I added the music. Timeline, January 20th. Joe Mixon tells the media Caserio has, quote, something cooked up, and, quote, fireworks will be here real soon, end quote. January 24th, Bobby Slowick fired, as in fireworks. Am I right? I added the am I right. February 3rd, Nick Caley hired. Caserio poached him from the Rams, and poached is a cooking technique. I see what you're saying. Okay, so the word firework. Mixon is a smart dude, and he's a great quote. I don't think he's that clever, Chris. I like it, though. I like it a lot. I don't think Mixon was alluding to anything having to do with the OC hire. You know how I know that? Because as of January 23rd, I saw a cut from Sean McVay that was recorded on January 23rd. As of January 23rd, Caley hadn't even requested, or nobody had requested to talk to him yet. So Mixon gave you that quote on the 20th. We'll see what it is. Chris in the ATL opines, I think Mixon knew Caserio's big addition was not a player, but coaching and scheme based. Joe did come from Zach Taylor's offense, a former McVay protege. It's a great point. Caserio was getting frustrated with Slowick, and towards the end of the season would pick Joe's brain on McVay-Taylor offensive scheme and fit with Stroud. I have no idea if that was going on. You're making that up. You may be right, Chris, but you're definitely making that up. Caserio may or may not have been getting frustrated. I don't know if he's walking in picking Joe's brain on stuff, but maybe he was. Now I'm going to go put on my tinfoil hat and surf the web for a pic of Caley at Mixon's 4th of July party. That's funny. So, yeah, I don't think Mixon was alluding to anything coaching-wise, pretty sure. But I do know there was major frustration with Bobby at all levels of the organization. Tippy top on down. All right, JR and Spicewood. Super excited about the new OC. What, if anything, did CJ have to do with the hire? Is he part of the interview process in any way? Always listening. Jonathan Alexander had a good piece on the Houston Chronicle last week about the process of arriving at a new OC. This is before they hired Caley. He had another good piece afterwards about Caley. Jonathan's doing a really good job on this stuff. But Jonathan said that CJ was at least going to be involved, that they were going to seek out his opinion, which I think they should. I don't think CJ should be the one handpicking the coordinator like Deshaun thought he should be able to handpick the GM and the head coach back in 2021. But I think I definitely think CJ was involved. I don't think he was a decision maker on it or anything, but I absolutely, I don't think he was part of the interview process either. I think they probably had certain candidates and CJ gave his opinion on things. They may have sat down and watched film of the different schemes, maybe, perhaps. But I would say he was involved. But if we're doing a level of involvement exercise, we're ranking Texans employees by level of involvement in the Nick Caley hire. I would say CJ is probably behind D'Amico for sure, Nick for sure. Maybe the McNairs probably had as big, if not a bigger hand in it than CJ. And then probably CJ would be the next opinion I'd seek out after all of them. I appreciate that very much. JR. All right, a few more here. How we doing on time? Seth and I are getting ready to go eat po' boys in a little bit. We're doing okay on time. Let's see. Spike in Melbourne. I've just seen the news. Nick Caley. You guys are all in on Nick Caley questions today. I love it. Has been hired as our OC, which at the moment I suppose I am happy about, but we'll wait and see how it all plays out. I think that's the right approach to take, Spike. One thing about Caley that stood out to me was the fact that he was the tight ends coach at the Rams for a couple of years. I therefore assume he knows a thing or two about blocking, an area the Texans need to improve. Am I reading too much into this, or do you think this is something that should make people feel more positive about the hire? I just alluded to that a minute ago, more so specifically with the actual tight end room. But this is one of the things that a lot of people have been saying over the last couple of days, which is a great point, is that there's no position coach who has to know more about what's going on with every facet of the offense than a tight ends coach. They've got to know about the blocking schemes for the run game. They've got to know about guys going out in patterns in the passing game. So I think it's great. Short of having a guy who's called plays before, this is the next best thing to me. So no, Spike, I think it's great. I think there's going to be an increased accentuation on the blocking and fundamentals as opposed to chalkboard warrior stuff. So I'm excited. I'm not like over the moon, like I said, but I'm very optimistic about Nick Caley as the new OC. Let's keep it moving. We've got a couple more. France in the North. A cold weather Super Bowl hasn't been played since the Seahawks beat the Broncos. God, that's about the only cold weather Super Bowl I can think of. That's me saying that. That was played in New York. France in the North says, do you think the NFL will ever try to host in a cold location in the future? Well, let me back up. A Super Bowl has not been played in cold weather since that Super Bowl in New York in 2014. But a Super Bowl has been held in a city that was fucking freezing ass, balls to the wall, miserable in Minnesota back in 2018. I hated that Super Bowl. It was so cold. Now, the game was played indoors, obviously, but I came home with a sinus infection. Oh, my God, it was brutal. That sucked. That's one of those ones, like oftentimes if we ever complain about the Super Bowl, I kind of stop and go, yeah, but man, so many of you would love to be doing what we're doing here, like sitting on Radio Row and meeting people. Like I have a cool job. I know that. Minnesota's the one Super Bowl where if people are like, you have a really cool job, I'd be like, fuck you. Minnesota sucked. It was terrible. I would have let any of you go in my place that week. And you're probably like, what, was Radio Row outdoors? No. But we had to go outside at times just to go like out to the car. That's how bad it is. And by the way, Radio Row is indoors in Minnesota, but it sucked. It was in a food court in the Mall of America. It was terrible. And everybody was crammed in together. And Seth almost squashed Josh Innes' head with his two hands, his bare hands. That part was actually entertaining. All right. Got me worked up, France in the North. Do I think they'll ever play one in a cold location in the future? I think the question is, I think they'll play one in a cold location. Do they play one do they play the actual game without a roof outdoors in the cold, I think is what you're asking. And I don't know. I mean, France, you're the one who lives up near Buffalo. So they're going to get a new stadium at some point, and they're not putting a roof on it, I don't think. That'll get interesting. I might skip that one. France in the North also says, realistically for this upcoming season, knowing we need O-line help, wide receiver, secondary, potentially another running back, taking precedence and helping this team being contenders next year, taking precedent. Is it drafting higher in the draft or for potential rookie help at those positions or paying up in the offseason? Which position gets the most attention? I'm not married to one way or the other with any of these positions. I suppose on the O-line, if I were to spend money, I'd rather a veteran on the O-line. They've got enough young guys on the O-line already. And that's one, if they're going to swap out, say, Shaq Mason, that's one where, boy, unless you are really sure about a guy, I would tend to spend the money there. Wide receiver, I can go either way. There's not a ton of great wide receivers out there on the market. I think Stephon Diggs is a big wild card for them. Like, what are they going to do with Diggs? Anything else, running back I would draft for sure. Secondary depth, I wouldn't mind spending a little bit of money on. But I don't have a strong feeling, France in the North, one way or the other, as to how they fill those positions. All right, Jeevan. Laramie Tunsil is one of the highest paid players on the Texans and a Pro Bowl level tackle. While he had a strong second half of the season, the offensive line as a whole struggled. Given his status as a team captain and veteran leader, how much responsibility should he take for the unit's overall performance? Do you think he could have done more in terms of leadership to help solidify the group? Look, I'm not in the building. I'm at practice at training camp. That's about it. I do know that Laramie took forever to get on the field in training camp because he was still nursing his knee injury. Laramie he seems like a great dude, really likable guy. I don't know him really, but his being a captain is a bit problematic to me. If not, at the very least, it's confusing. How much responsibility should he take for the unit's overall performance? Look, if he were a captain, he'd take a lot of responsibility for it. He's the leader of that group. He's supposed to be the tone setter for that group. He's the best player. But when the best players are the ones taking responsibilities for the failure of the whole, that's leadership. and holding the other guys accountable too. And I don't know how much Laramie's into that, or if he's just into doing his job. I don't know. Like I said, I'm very confused about his captaincy the last couple years. So yes, I think he could do more in leadership in terms of just practicing on a regular basis. You know what I mean? Or all the time. All right. Hey, one quick acknowledgement on the way out. Joe Q, I know you listen to every podcast. I got your very, very long email, and I've forwarded it to my own personal email so I can sit down and read it. Joe Q had a ton of offensive line thoughts that I don't think they were for the mailbag, the podcast portion. I think it was more for my own enlightenment. But I want to acknowledge that, Joe. I don't want you to think that I just skipped over your email, because usually I got an email to read from Joe Q. This wasn't as mailbag friendly, at least until I read the whole thing. So I appreciate that. Good thoughts on the O-line, Joe Q. All right, so that's it. Good mailbag. Very Nick Caley heavy mailbag. Again, if you want to email, right there, if you're watching on YouTube, houmailbag@gmail.com. Give us a subscribe, give us a rating, give us a review as well. And we will see you, if not this week, be back for a mailbag, a post-Super Bowl mailbag. It all depends on how my schedule shakes out here. So maybe you get another episode this week if I can make that happen. But hope you enjoyed this one. Appreciate everybody subscribing and continuing to follow along. It's going to get good. We'll probably start to get a little more guest heavy in the offseason, particularly with the draft and free agency coming up. A lot of you have requested certain guests and things like that, so I'll be working on that as well, trying to make this the best it can possibly be for you guys. So for my producer, Jared Rowland, who is now responsible for getting this podcast out to you guys each and every episode, and all of you for listening, really appreciate you. I am headed to go eat po' boys with Seth C. Payne momentarily. Until then, have a great week, everybody. Appreciate you.